Hi, and welcome to my comparison and reasons for upgrading from the Haswell generation Z87 to the Skylake generation Z170 chipset and motherboards, using both the Deluxe Asus Deluxe motherboard and the Intel 6700K. Now, why? Probably the first question is coming in your mind, why would you even do this? Really, the Z87 platform is still relevant and continue to be relevant for some time yet, especially with a 4770K or 4790 Devil's Canyon CPU overclocked at that. So very, very powerful CPUs in their own right, when Skylake only offers about 10 to 20% performance gain on CPU intensive tasks and probably little or no gain on GPU intensive tasks, that is a lot of games. And I'll show some interesting things about that coming up. And really, most PC experts, and I think of Maximum PC, it's one of my favorite places to go, really advise not to do this upgrade if you already have a Haswell generation setup, CPU and motherboard, etc. Given that there's only 10 to 20% gain in a lot of tasks, CPU tasks, in Canada, this upgrade cost me $11.50. So that's a fair amount of money just for the CPU, RAM, and motherboard, because you have to go for DDR3 to DDR4 for the RAM. But it's really the I wants it factor. You know, we are PC enthusiasts. This is what we do. It is the latest generation stuff. So, you know, the sparkly, shiny object is a must-have. Well, the other factors are really, I can sell my Haswell platform right now and I still get some cash for it. You know, there's an optimum time to sell some things before they become obsolete, and it's a diminishing return for the investment you made in the first place. So this is one reason to do this as of March 2016. I could have even done it earlier, but just didn't get around to it. Another big reason actually is the more PCIe lanes. On Skylake, there's 16 on the CPU for graphics cards, 8x8 in SLI, and 20 on the chipset. Now, the ones in the chipset that will control a lot of the SATA, a lot of your PCIe SSDs, USB, and things like that. So you have another 20 for a total of 36. Versus Haswell, which had 24, 16 for an 8x8 SLI, or 16 for a single GPU graphics card and your motherboard, and only 8 more on the chipset. So that's a little bit more limiting and robbing than the CPU PCIe express lanes if you need them. So really, for that reason, the Skylake is more future-proof. And if we'll get to this in the last point, if you get to SSDs, that's a factor. There's also a much better overclocking potential on the 6700K, and this is a lot due to the better heat or thermal dissipation that Intel has put into this generation of CPU, as well as uncoupling of the voltage regulation from the on die, from the CPU itself back to the chipset on the motherboard. So this uncouples them, and that was an issue with the overclocking of the 4770K and other Haswell generation CPUs, because that voltage regulation was sometimes, a lot of people believe, interfering with the ability to get a higher overclock. The other big reason is eventually I would like to add a nice NVMe PCIe SSD, such as the Samsung 950 Pro. And that is, this motherboard has a particular slot down here where my mouse is circling for the M2 SSDs, which is a really nice addition on this motherboard. There's a lot of nice features about this motherboard. I'm not going to go into a lot of them. You can go into Asus's site and see some of the differences between Z87 and Z170. Too long for here. One thing to note though, the Z170 Deluxe has some fewer USB ports in the rear, 2 fewer USB ports, which is a factor for me because I have a lot of USB connectivity requirements. So there's used to be 10 on the there is 10 on the Z87, and there are 8 now on the Z170. Not a big change, and probably won't need to use all of those, but it is something to note. Okay, the other question is, why Asus and why the Deluxe? Well, I strongly believe that the Deluxe motherboard from Asus is one of the best motherboards you can buy for all-round applications. And here's why I think that. In this picture, you'll see the gold Z87 on the left and the white current Z170 generation on the right. Both of these boards really overclock quite well, regardless of the CPU generation you happen to be using. And we'll talk a little bit about this later on when I get to overclocking in this video. They both have awesome connectivity. As I mentioned, lots of USB connectivity, lots of Wi-Fi comes with them on the go here. You can have that. There's a lot of, well, now there's M2 on the Z170. SATA Express is here, SATA Express is here. There's a lot of SATA ports, and they're just really well designed and tough and durable motherboards. They're nice looking boards, as you can see, depending on which series you like. They're stable and reliable. I mean, that's probably the most important factor for buying a motherboard. These are very stable boards. They overclock well, stable, and they overclock well. They're reliable. They consistently get good reviews from experts, and as a result, you know, a big important thing is that their resale is high when you go to exchange your parts. So that's always something if you're flipping and are an enthusiast and you want to turn your parts around. So then why the 6700K, the i7-6000K, and not the i5-6600K? I think even most enthusiasts would be satisfied with either of these chips, really. They're very nice chips. The 6700K has hyper-threading and best overclocking performance and has a bit more L3 cache than the i5. This may not be really a big factor for gaming, which are generally GPU-intensive tasks, but would be better for multi-threaded tasks. In fact, the 6700K comes pretty close to some of the multi-core, Intel's more expensive multi-core Haswell last generation multi-core chips, the 6-core and 8-core. It's not far cry off when you compare video encoding. Yes, the 5860 is hands down the fastest chip for that, but the 6700 comes pretty close, which is a big thing to say for a hyper-threaded 4-core offering. However, keep in mind that the 6700K costs $200 more than the i5, at least in Canada it does, and in the States it's probably about 100 and some odd more. So that's a factor, and if I could spell neither right, we would say that neither of these comes with a CPU fan. So remember that when you're buying this, you'll need a good cooling solution, either air or water. Oh, just a picture here. I use the H100i, which is a nice closed loop cooler, and does well with these series of chips, as it did with the 4770K. And then finally, for the RAM, I went with the 2660 megahertz RAM at cast latency of 16. And you know, why did I choose the Vengeance? Well, again, great for overclocking, very good stable RAM, nice looking. I went with the red for some contrast on the motherboard. The dependable and stable RAM, excellent cost to performance ratio. That's one thing to keep in mind. I think this RAM, this package of two 8 gigabit modules was only a little over $100 Canadian. I forget the actual cost, but maybe it was like 120 Canadian, which is pretty good. That's not a lot of money for RAM. And the 266 megahertz is a nice sweet spot for performance versus cost. When you start to get higher than that, you start to pay quite a bit of money for that really negligible gain in performance. I mean, it's negligible gain from 1600 in the end, really, from the D3 1600, but it's still a little bit more, and it's not a lot more money. And that's my last point here. There's not much gain really in having very, very fast RAM. It sounds good, but as we all know, that doesn't do much for performance, particularly for gaming and some other tasks. It does have a factor on multi-threaded CPU core intensive tasks. It will make some gain there, but little difference in gaming. Okay, so let's look at the overall system that we're going to continue with at this point. The Asus Z170, as you can see, H6700K with the H100i, the RAM, the Vengeance RAM, 780T case, and quite honestly, the white motherboard of the Z170 looks nice in the white of 780T. Power supply AX850, always a good idea to get a good power supply. Can't stress that enough. The AX series are top notch from Corsair. 2 GTX 980 SCs in SLI with a fancy little bling bridge there, the EVGA bling bridge keeping them together. Couple of SSDs from Samsung, a couple of Western Digital Blacks for backup and mass storage. A Zonar STX 7.1 sound card, which I use for gaming, but for serious audio listening, I use asynchronous USB to my Musical Fidelity M1 DAC via Wire World cable. And I must say this motherboard sounds very nice via the USB, asynchronous USB. I think there's a difference from the Z87. It seems clearer and there's greater imaging and depth. If you're a sound person like I am, who is also an audiophile or audio enthusiast, I detect some differences and greater clarity with this board, and it could be due to greater isolation of some of the circuits and the USB circuits, and just generally differences, some slight differences in topography on the board. Anyway, isolating crosstalk, these things can matter for audio if you've got a very good high resolution system, highly resolving system. Yeah, that might be a factor. Windows 10, Corsair Silent Series AF fans. I don't like to hear my PC too much, so I have the Silent Series and static pressure fans for the radiator on the H100i. And of course, I upgraded to Windows 10 while I was doing all this. And I'm not going to talk a lot about Windows 10 here, it's not the point, but I must say I'm generally quite pleased with it. Turn your privacy settings down, minimize that as much as possible if you want to. If you care about this, you can do this. Lots of videos on the web to do this, so it is something I suggest. Okay, now we're going to get on to some thermals and overclocking, and I'm going to show a couple of things using live program. Okay, welcome back. So this is what we have for thermals and a certain voltage on the 6700K. So using HW monitor, I'm getting thermals in and around, the minimum it ranges here. As you can see, it's oscillating between 37 and 50 some odd, which is a little high for idle. It depends on what your CPU is doing, and if we open up our CPU task manager, you can see we're using about 40% of CPU right now. I don't know why, something's going on, probably because I'm running this video, but if that's down at idle, where the CPU is down at 2-3%, this drops down to about high 20s, roughly high 20s, low 30s at most. And that's keeping in mind that we're running at 4.6 right now, all the time. I have to play with the Intel speed stepping. It's supposed to step down right now, but I think I have to play with the C states a bit more in the BIOS to make it go down. It's a tweak I need to make. Yeah, it's not a big factor, but I will do this. Keeping in mind that the voltage is constant, I've manually set the voltage to 1.34 or 1.344 in CPU Z. So this is a temperature reflecting the overclock of a standard 4.6. So that actually is really good temperature for a 4.6 overclock, and the CPU at about 31, 35, anywhere between 30 to 35%. So that's just to show you what the thermals are like at not quite idle really, but maybe something typical of everyday usage, not gaming. Okay, so let's move on with the presentation. So let's go then to some overclocking, and there's a couple things I want to show you here. I showed you the HW monitor and CPU Z. That was the general voltage and overclocking profile for the Z1, for the 6700K. But I want to show you about a good thing to do for overclocking information. I often go to this site right here, overclocked.net, and you look for Haswell overclocking guide or Skylake overclocking guide with statistics, and here you can get a nice spreadsheet that you can download. And I think you have to become a member, but that's a good thing to do if you're an overclocker, because this is a great site. And then you can go and use something, pop this information into Excel, for instance, and isolate all of the information you need. In my case, I isolated all the Asus Z170 motherboards. There were also some Deluxe in here, but they were actually higher overclocks than I wanted. They were at 4.7, 4.8, so they're not isolated here or filtered here. So I filtered the results for 46 and 45, sorry, 4.6, 4.5 gigahertz, or core multiplier of 46 or 45. And then I wanted to see what the V core was in the BIOS. And so you can get an average of 1.36 in the BIOS, and again 1.36 showing in such programs as CPU Z and others. So yeah, about 1.36. I'm able to achieve about 1.34, which is great. I'm a little bit below the average for this level of overclocking, and therefore running a little cooler than some of these ones would. So yeah, very useful site, overclocker.net, for providing overclocking information for your particular chipset, and I use it all the time. Okay, let's go on and look at some performance indicators. Cinebench. I used the 11.5 version because this is what I had at the time for the 4770K, so I wanted to duplicate it. There are more recent versions now that do four-dimensional, I think they call it four-dimensional CPU testing. Anyway, the 4770K at 4.2 achieved a score of 8.61, and this is a CPU intensive benchmark, by the way. It's not a graphics benchmark. It's indicating, yeah, overall CPU performance. While the 6700K achieved a score of 10.2 at 4.2 gigahertz, and that's this lower brown line here. So it's 10.17 to be exact, and 10.5 at 4.6 gigahertz. So this other brown line up here represents about 10.5. So a very good score. I mean, should do better than the 4770K on CPU intensive tasks. And that is going to be about a 20% difference. So yeah, that's a 10 to 20% difference. So right in where we expected from all the pundits who are saying that's about what we should get. If we, excuse me, if we look at some benchmarks, graphical benchmarks, again, GPU intensive benchmarks, there's really no difference between the 6700K and the 4770K, one at 4.6 and one at 4.4. The score is really given variation. I only ran this once. This is 69, this is 69. So there's no difference. Yeah, we wouldn't expect a difference, I don't think, with this particular benchmark. But let's look at something that was interesting and I was hoping for, actually. If we look at the performance of Assassin's Creed Syndicate at 4K, and that's the resolution there, as of March 2016, so with all the patches that it's had, which I think are 3 major patches to improve performances and tweaks. And I use AC Syndicate because I often have had AC Syndicate crash my overclocks when I think it was stable. So that's interesting. It's sometimes not always well optimized, the game, but it does use a fair amount of CPU, at least it's sensitive to the CPU. Anyway, that's my preference. The other one is Metro Last Light Benchmark, which is a good one to use. So using the 4770K at 4.2 with the SLI, GTX SLI, and overclocking the SLI, the cards to 1430, FPS and AC Syndicate when out of doors, that is running around outside, ranges from about 45 to 55. The highest I ever really used to see outside was about 55. And that's at high setting, medium shadows, FXAA on, and ambient occlusion off. But I'd get 60 greater 60 or greater FPS indoors on the 4770K. With the 6700K, however, at 4.5 and 4.6, the FPS rarely dips below 60 FPS. It's quite a shock. I didn't expect that, and that's with ambient occlusion on. When I put ambient occlusion on the 4770K, it had a dramatic effect on FPS. It lowered it about 5 to 10 FPS. So when I turn this off, actually this is even greater. And it does range from 40s to 80s, sometimes in some graphically intensive parts of the game, lots of foliage and stuff. It does dip to the 40s. But then inside it's always much greater than 60. And that's at 4K. And I'm pretty happy with that. So here's some screenshots just to show you what I'm talking about. So 65, just sitting around peering at things with a mission in front of me. Running around 66. So yeah, not much above 60 in a lot of scenarios with a lot of characters and non-playing characters and running around and doing what they do. But it can get up to 80 in some dark, when there's not as much shadowing or light intensive features. You can see it's 81 here. And then it can, however, dip down to 48 is the lowest I've seen really. And when you have a lot of reflective areas and you have foliage and things and some shadowing, that can have an effect. So that's just a few benchmarks. I didn't go into detail here because there's lots of stuff on the web already and YouTube about comparing FPS for 6700K in various games. So just my take quickly on that. So now I'm going to show you some tips for the build that I did as upgrade, and I'll show you a few photos in this regard. I think that's here. So yeah, I'm going to show off a couple of pictures here. This is what these parts look like. Kind of nice, whatever. Oops, not what I wanted to do. Here we are. Yeah, I put this photo in here because although you can't see it very easily, I'm just going to go back. The 6700 series and the Z170 chips come with a little plastic, you can see part of it, a little plastic insert. So you actually put the chip into the plastic insert, then put it on the motherboard. And there's two reasons for this. This is to make it really very simple to get it aligned right. The little triangle goes in the bottom left corner, and it's also marked on the piece of plastic. But the real reason for this plastic bit, as I understand, is actually to have uniform pressure on this small PCB board. Apparently, there were some worries that the Skylake platform chips couldn't stand up to the pressure of the 4770s or the Haswell generations, or would bend, in other words. But so motherboard manufacturers weren't taking any chances and putting these plastic inserts in. At least Asus is doing it. I believe others are doing it as well. So you'll have to do that first, then insert it on the motherboard. No big deal. It's a very simple step. See YouTube videos if you need to, but it's pretty straightforward. This is what we had to take out: the sound card and graphics card and memory. And that's nice because I didn't have to do much else. I could leave my cooler in and just put it to the side, because the nice thing about the Z170, 780T, is that there's lots of room, and I could just move the hoses off to the side and all the cabling off to the side. Didn't have to touch the hard drives, of course. And then I could pop out in and out the various motherboards. So this is what they look like. That's again the same photo from the beginning. Very similar layout and design, but of course a few differences in, obvious differences in some of where the batteries are, CMOS batteries are, and a little bit more thermal protection. I think they both look nice, really. I always like the gold on the Z87, and I'm so actually with the plastic bits on the Z170. It's okay. This oscillates a blue strobe, or you can change it to however you like. Well, we'll get to that point in a minute. Yeah, that just shows you more about the plastic bit, about when you're putting it in. Oh yeah, I wanted to put this in because my favorite thing to clean when you're cleaning and removing chips and changing motherboards and changing chips and everything is I like to use coffee filters and isopropyl alcohol, of course, 70% at least, for cleaning your chips and your coolers. And I used Arctic Silver 5 thermal paste. So this results in a nice clean cooler on the bottom. Make sure you do that. And a nice clean chip. And that's what it looks like when the motherboard's in, and looks pretty clean, lots of room, no connections yet. Oh, I put this in. This is quite nice. The back of the motherboard itself has a nice reflective sort of swirling colored surface. Not that you see it, but you might in certain setups, but you don't really see it. It's kind of nice. It doesn't light up or anything. Nice color coding, however, nice color coding of the various USB ports. Here's a good example, actually, just see the back input output ports. So this is a USB-C, Type C. I don't have one. I don't have any devices Type C. So right now I just bought an adapter to go back to USB 3.1 to make it similar to all these other ones. So you only get one USB 2 legacy port. The other ones are various power. The colors indicate the times 10 power transfer rate too. And this is for the Wi-Fi. You can connect a dongle basically, or a transmitter. And then you have HDMI, SPI, 5.1 out, and DisplayPort. And then your retro, which uses the Creative Sound Blaster Crystal Series sound if you use it. By the way, if you use this port, it does not use the Crystal Sound series, so keep that in mind. That's a big factor, actually. See, it says Crystal Sound. It has all this nice Creative Sound Blaster level audio, and they really tout that on this board. But if you don't use it, if you don't use, you're basically your speaker out, then you're not going to use it. You're going to be your digital out. So yeah, keep that in mind. Coaxial out. Thermal paste, not too much, pea-sized. That's just about enough. Maybe it's a tad too much, but that's probably all right. It's just things to keep in mind. That's the RAM, nice color. There's the cooler going in, nice, lots of room with the RAM, looks quite nice. Okay, I put this shot in because Asus really touts this nice strobing backlight here. This light pulsates blue. Light at the bottom of the side, but you really can't see it. I mean, you put one graphics card in, you might see a bit of it, but with two, you do not see it at all. Plus my PC's on an angle. I don't see it face on, so I don't know. It's nice, but practically useless in my case. When you have installed everything, check all your connections before you power up. Just double check. This is an example of why. This guy popped out. It wasn't fully seated, and when I moved things around a bit more after I installed the graphics card, I noticed this guy had popped out. So do that. That should be standard practice. Make sure you check all your connections before you actually power up. And this is what the system looks like when it's all together. And this is without Windows installed. I just powered it up just to make sure it would boot and hear that nice beep that you want to hear before you install the OS, and that all the fans are turning and it's cooling and all the power is going to where it should be. Your cards are lighting up, your motherboard's lighting up, and your fans. So do that as a first step, right? You make sure everything's powered before you install your OS. And that's what the system looks like with everything installed. And if we want to see a little video, what the hell, why not? We can just show you quickly here what, that's me, and a nice shiny Corsair H100i. Show you a little quickly how things look. So there's the strobing bit that you really don't see, and me knocking something over. Hard drives. Yeah, enough said, really. That's just another hidden one down there because I wanted to. Okay, I think that's really all I wanted to show. So I hope you enjoyed the Z87 to Z170 upgrade, quasi upgrade, let's call it. May not be for everybody. Thanks for tuning in.